Persuasive or illustrated photography is found most often in advertising, and basically it's designed to change the way you think, to propel you to buy something or want something, or challenge the way you've perceived the past or even the present. The main difference between the two styles of documentation and persuasive is, instead of trying to document reality, persuasive photography tries to alter how you think of reality. It's trying to change your behavior or perhaps even your thought process. A good example is like this photograph here. Now, this is a common thing that people do. This guy does not walk around like this, obviously, but it is an interesting, it does pose some thoughts in your mind as to this individual, the masks we wear, that type of thing. Those are all psychological elements that are floating subconsciously in your head and can be evoked by photography, and either type, either documentation or in persuasive. But persuasive seems to play on it more than anybody else. Now, in this conceptual piece by David Jackson, it shows a very real moment, but a very fictitious situation. It's almost comical in its tragic sense. And we see a lot of this right now in conceptual photography, and digital has really opened up the door to that, which is really great. Photographers have done conceptual photography since back in the 1860s, but this now with digital really kind of opens the Pandora's box towards it and makes it really, really easier. The issue here is as I say, the issue of truth, which again, as I mentioned before, we'll talk about when we get to ethics. In different types of situations, some things can look very documentary in nature, like this church in Canada, but because of its iconic imagery, it also has a persuasive approach in those darkened clouds surrounding the church. You can see that sometimes when we talk about these types of photography, the lines can get a little bit blurred. For instance, on this one, this is a very documentary approach, but yet a very persuasive message coming through here. The placement, particularly of the hands of the dad and of the child's head proceeding just into the iPhone's field of view, is an interesting mix of reality and fantasy. And this is a rather strong statement into what we perceive today as our digital world. I think even the placement of the word frozen up in the left-hand corner is rather interesting in itself. And all of us have a reaction to this photograph. Advertising, particularly in the areas of sex and fantasy, are main ingredients of persuasive photography. Advertisers pay huge amounts of money to have their products placed strategically in these types of pictures to persuade you to do certain things. Sometimes persuasive photography can look very documentary in nature. Don't be fooled. Guess is a primary example of doing that repeatedly. You need to make sure that you don't confuse the two. And again, if you are just a consumer of photographs and not an observer, it is really easy just to suck it in and think, okay, this is reality, when it is not. Illustrated photography, which again, as I mentioned before when I talked about the conceptual, is really the big new territory in photography, and it challenges your imagination and senses. Advertising is really taking a hold of this type of photography, and it is very interesting and fun and challenging to do. Sometimes photographs mean a lot. Other times it's just for the sheer artwork of it. I'm not exactly sure what this photograph means, but it is intriguing and interesting. But also, illustrated photography always likes to take you one step beyond, like tantalizing your imagination, which is really, really quite fun, and sometimes even make an editorial statement like this image. So such images like that, though they may look very simple in presentation, normally take a lot of time and energy. This simple illustration by itself, I think, is a combination of about 7 or 8 images together. Again, these illustrative or persuasive styles suspend reality and plays upon, many times, your subliminal thoughts. Food is always persuasive, mainly because we all need it, we all want it, and we all consume it. So food, by their very nature, would be considered a persuasive style of photography. So documentation tends to change our global perspective in our way we should live or the things people do to each other, while persuasive photography works more on our inner perspective of what we need, want, or have to have. A good example of a conflict between persuasive and documentation is those wonderful ice cream photos that we see at Baskin-Robbins. They're there to do one thing, and that's to separate you from your money. In a persuasive sense, they do their job well. You walk into Baskin-Robbins and you really want to buy ice cream. But in a documentary sense, if you're a photographer and you're looking at how these photographs are actually obtained, you realize that many times the ice cream that you are seeing is not really ice cream at all, but believe it or not, it is frozen lard. Yes, it looks just like ice cream, and that is what they use. Not all the time, but most of the time. That's how you photograph ice cream, by not really photographing ice cream. It's a lie. So persuasive photography is to get you emotionally to connect with the subject, idea, or a fantasy to change your behavior. Yes, in persuasive photography, you are being manipulated by imagery. In our next video, we'll take a little deeper look in comparing the two and to find out what is going on.